Dylan Edwards on the season, 21 carries, 179 yards, 8.5 yards per carry. That's crazy. Why is Dylan Edwards getting 6 carries in a game? 6 carries for 41 yards at BYU, 6 carries for 41 yards against Arizona, 4 carries for 54 yards against Tulane. This is not rocket science. Get your best players to football.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into another edition of 3Ma. I am John Kurtz, joined by Cole Manbeck. I made it back from Utah. DY did not. Some travel issues there, so we are going to take this with just the two of us. And I know that many of you needed many a glass of Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon after K-State gets crushed out in Provo, 38-9 by BYU. But glad that you all had Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon on your hands. If you did not, what are you waiting for? Go check it out from our friends at Holiday Distillery. Great K-State people who are hurting like you on Saturday, so go support them. Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon or 360 vodka. You can get it for the tailgate this weekend, as K-State does have another huge game coming up with Oklahoma State coming to town. A couple of teams that will be pretty desperate for a win to stay in the Big 12 title race on Saturday. Lots of things to talk about before we get to turning the page toward Oklahoma State and what is coming up this week. But, total implosion. It is 6-3 at the end of the first half. K-State has completely controlled and dominated the game. Didn't punch in a couple of touchdowns, which obviously is a huge storyline in this game. But then in a 6-minute span, 6 minutes of game time, K-State gives up 31 points, which is crazy. And I guess if we're going to go back to 6-0 K-State, that's when you give up 31 points in 6 minutes of game time. Unbelievable. DJ Giddens' first fumble. Poorly timed. It turns into a scoop and score. There is another interception from Avery Johnson, another quick touchdown. You give up the punt return touchdown. That was damn near 100 yards at the end of the first half after the fumble. And then Avery Johnson threw another bad interception as well in the second half. It just completely came unglued. Everything went against K-State, and they did it to themselves, quite frankly. I don't know. I mean, we talk about duds. I don't want to sit here and gloat too much about totally calling this in the offseason, but that is 100% what this was, and it was really just a dud of a 6-minute stretch that I don't know that I've seen K-State play a worse 6-minute stretch of football.
Yeah, I mean, you called it in the preseason pod, and I was thinking about it on Saturday night as things were unfolding in the way they did. That you predicted that. I wanted to believe things would be different this go around, and unfortunately, they were not. Now, this felt different in the sense that K-State came out ready to play. I mean, they were controlling and dictating the football game. It wasn't like they were getting dominated from the start. In fact, I think if K-State punches those first 2 drives in for touchdowns, I think K-State wins this game going away by 10 plus. I mean, if they capitalize in the red zone on both of those possessions and get up 14-0 or even 10-0, let's say you get one of those 2 in, you take that crowd out of the game, you take the steam and the energy out of the stadium. K-State's offense was methodically driving down and controlling the line of scrimmage. But to me, that's one of the biggest storylines. It's just the inability to capitalize when they got in the red zone there. You have a 3rd and 4, and it looks like they have a touchdown play dialed up, but there's an illegal snap called on Kansas State that puts them in a 3rd and 9. And then for whatever reason, Connor Riley once again calls a running play on a 3rd and long situation, which is inexplicable to me when you just had a touchdown play dialed up on the play at 4 at 3rd and 4. He calls a running play just like he did against Arizona when they were in scoring position in a 3rd and 10. And then what makes that even more inexplicable is on the very next drive, they're in a 2nd and 5 inside the 15-yard line. On that very same drive, have ran the ball 10 times for 86 yards, 8.6 yards per carry. They'd been on the field for 14 plays. The BYU defense had been on the field for 14 minutes compared to 7 for K-State's defense. They were completely gassed. You're controlling the line of scrimmage. You're in a 2nd and 5 in the red zone, and you drop back and pass back-to-back times instead of running the ball when it's 4-down territory in my mind, and there's no way BYU is stopping you if you say we're going to line up and run the ball 3 straight times to get 5 yards with the way K-State was owning the line of scrimmage. It doesn't make sense. There's too much inconsistency in the play calling right now that is baffling to me. You run it in 3rd and long. You pass it in 2nd and short and 3rd and short. I don't get it. And it's just there's too many situations like this happening. We can talk about the end of the first half as well. It's a similar issue, but there's too many problems right now when it comes to the offensive play calling. And yes, the players made mistakes as well. They didn't help themselves with penalties. Obviously, the illegal snap, the hold that got him in that situation because Avery Johnson had picked up 8 yards on one of the runs. It would have been in a 2nd and 2, but there was a hold called. That backed him up, but they made all the yards back on the very next play. We could start off with the second half, John. I mean, DJ Giddens on the second play of the drive to start the second half down 17-6 as a 25-yard run to midfield. It's a 17-6 game, and you're in scoring position at that point. You cross there into opponent's territory, but there's an illegal formation. That's coming out of halftime. Like, I just too many mistakes, immaturity, use. I mean, we were worried about communication errors, mistakes like that, but I didn't expect to have that many pre-snap penalties, and that was obviously a big issue as well.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I'm with you. I understand, obviously, the frustration with the play calling. I can reiterate. So, like, I was in the box, and I was kind of like right on the borderline of, I was like the end of the K-State row, and so to my left was like DY and all those guys. To my right, BYU folks. And the one in particular that got to them is passing the ball back to back when you had them gassed at the end of that drive. They literally were looking around. They were kind of, I will say that they were a little more cynical. Like a lot of the BYU attitude around this game, they show up, they support their team, but so many people that I talked to before the game, like very cynical attitude. BYU thought their fans thought they were going to lose and lose pretty handily. And so they had kind of that attitude. And these guys that I'm listening to next to me, they were just like, what is their offensive coordinator doing? Like, just run the ball. Like, that was easy. Just run the ball. Like, literally, the BYU folks in the press box were saying that. So, yeah, man, it's very frustrating. I will, to play devil's advocate on the other side a bit, just say they did have a touchdown schemed up that would have at least made it 10-0 at that point, which I'm with you. I think that makes it a much different game. And they had mistakes from, again, still a relatively new offensive line this year playing in a hostile environment. You know, I mean, I will just say, I'm sure there were some K-State fans that were kind of like, I mean, I know it's supposed to be a great environment, whatever. It definitely affected them. And, an illegal snap penalty, I mean, it's just like, dude. And then, it's maddening coming out of halftime to have an illegal formation on a huge play like that. Is just such an easy thing, right? That's such an unforced error, shooting yourself in the foot. But 3 times they got in the red zone, wound up kicking field goals. 3 times they had a penalty that killed the drive. So it's just, yes, Connor Riley, I think, needs to be better. It doesn't feel like he has a great feel right now. And there were multiple instances of that, but it would have looked a lot better and I think felt a lot better had they had some better execution. And, look, I love Avery Johnson. I think he's going to be great, but that was sort of a lights are too bright kind of moment too for him, where I just don't think the game has slowed down enough for him. I mean, I saw the play that just really got me. So I came down from the press box into the stands for the first part of the third quarter. Because there's a BYU fan there who was nice enough to give my girlfriend a ticket. And so they were sitting in the end zone. So I'm in the end zone in the stands watching the beginning of the third quarter. And so I saw from behind Avery Johnson's interception there. And I looked around and I was like, well, first of all, it sure looked like he could have run for potentially the first down, if not close to it. And then second of all, if that wasn't intercepted by the first guy, there's a defensive back waiting there to pick that off too. I mean, it was just from that angle, it just looked like such a bad decision. And so, like, I don't know, man. I mean, again, otherworldly talented, but we're seeing like the growing pains that you need to go through as a quarterback. And BYU does have a pretty salty defense, and they've got a really good crowd and a really good environment that I think put the clamps down on everything.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are going to be growing pains through this, and probably wasn't talked enough about going into the season. I mean, Jackson Arnold, who was in Avery Johnson's same class and a top 5 quarterback recruit in the country, just got benched by Oklahoma.
Yeah, and not only that, I was literally listening to Josh Pate this morning. Josh Pate was like, "Yeah, it's done. Jackson Arnold era is over." I mean, that like Oklahoma people are talking about moving on to the Hawkins kid, like just that Jackson Arnold done. See ya. Now that's SEC. I mean, they've got a lot more pressure to move on there. But yes, for context, I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, and that seems like quite the rush to judgment, but that is the nature of playing in the SEC and at Oklahoma, I guess, because I think Jackson Arnold could have a bright future still. But that I just call that out because, there are guys so youthful in their career like Avery Johnson that aren't even playing. Like just a couple weeks ago, John, I pulled the top 20 ranked quarterbacks in Avery Johnson's recruiting class, and only 5 are starting. Okay, 15 haven't started yet for their respective teams. And out of the 5 starting, Avery Johnson probably ranked right around 3rd in terms of performance behind Eli Holstein at Pitt, who transferred from Alabama to Pitt this offseason. And that's been maybe a revelation and surprise how good he's been. And then obviously, I'll butcher the name, Nico Amaleva, Tennessee. I should just call him Nika. I never got it right.
Iamaleava.
I didn't even have the broadcast. I had the broadcast muted. I was watching a different game, so I had that on in background on Saturday nights. I never pronounced his name right. He's obviously been the star of that class to date. Arch Manning hasn't played anybody in the times that he's been on the field, so you can't say anything about his performances really yet. And then you've got Avery. And there are going to be mistakes and growing pains of going through that. And this was the first real tough road environment that he has played in front of. Texas Tech last year, they just took the wind out of that Tech crowd early on in that game. So I probably wouldn't compare it. And obviously there's a different energy level at BYU because they're 3-0. K-State's got a target on their back as a top 15 team. And just snowballed, obviously, on Saturday night. One mistake led to another, and probably the bigger concern is they just didn't have an answer to slow it. They couldn't stop the bleeding in any way. It just kept going downhill during that 6-minute stretch. Yeah, I've never seen anything like that from a Kansas State football team before. The DJ Giddens fumble was shocking. You said it was his first fumble. I assume fumble lost. I don't recall, though, he's ever put the ball on the ground, right, John? I don't even think he's ever lost, a ball's even left his hands.
Yeah, we were all trying to figure that out because it wasn't listed on, the official website. I discovered that because I was looking up something for BYU, too. I discovered that, fumble. Oh, it was because I was looking up Retzloff last week. I was like, nobody seems to keep the stats on, fumbles lost individually on their websites. But, yeah, I believe the word that we got was that it was the first fumble of DJ Giddens' career. Yeah, very, very poorly timed for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so a guy that's carried the ball 370 plus times, that happens. It's scooped and scored. And then the interception. I mean, look, I don't need to rattle all that off. I mean, the bigger issue I have, again, is what transpired in those last couple of minutes. You can't control DJ Giddens fumbling. Obviously, that felt more fluky than anything. But it seemed like K-State at that point, up 6-3, was ready to just try to bleed the clock when they got the ball with around 2 minutes, 20 seconds left to take it into halftime with the 6-3 lead, which, okay, they ended up, things catapulted in a really negative direction regardless. So I guess you could say maybe that would have been the right decision with the mistakes that did unfold. But if you were willing to go into the locker room up 6-3 and bleed the clock out, then you sure as hell don't start dropping back with 1:08 left with the crowd raucous and energized down 10-6 when you get the ball first to start the second half. And so the inconsistencies once again with, if your idea is you're going to bleed the clock and go into the locker room up 6-3 with 2 minutes left, that plan should not change just because BYU took a 10-6 lead. You get the ball to start the second half, okay, you can run your game plan. As long as you're down 4 points, you can come out and just run the ball and you can stick to your scheme. You're not down by 11 plus. And instead, they drop back and put Avery Johnson in a situation where the BYU defense has got their ears pinned back and the crowd is roaring, and another mistake happens, and then they're down 17-6, and then it almost felt like they had to abandon the game plan going into the second half. So I didn't understand that either.
Well, let me say this, in again, kind of back to devil's advocate mode, at least as it specifically pertains to Connor Riley. I think a couple of things to point out here. One, they had an injury issue with Braden Lofton, who got hurt early in the game, and Chris Kleiman said afterwards they're not really sure exactly how serious it is, but it didn't sound like it was worst case scenario there with the knee issue, but they're still not totally sure how long he'll be out. Garrett Oakley came back into the game, but he was also out. So in the first half there, they were playing, like Will Ancio, really young tight end there. They were really stretched thin at tight end. And what have we seen them have so much success with in the red zone? Like, it's been all tight ends and running backs catching the touchdown passes. So I do think that affected things. I think they were struggling a bit in terms of blocking. And that's where I'm just trusting the acumen of DY, what I was hearing from DY up in the box watching that. So that did hurt them. And then, to be honest, like, they don't have a downfield passing game. Like, and that's, Avery just doesn't really have that consistently yet. They tried to take a couple of shots, had an opportunity with Cephas, and the ball was overthrown a little bit, had an opportunity with Jaden Jackson to start the second half. The throw wasn't quite there. I mean, there are some ways in which I think he's just handcuffed a little bit. I know that doesn't really excuse for, like, hey, just run the ball in the red zone. I'm with you on that. They were able to run the ball, but a part of the problem is, and maybe we should just make this the top storyline, which is brought to you by our friends at Elenco. If you have any home improvement needs, make sure to talk with our friends at Elenco, great K-State folks and a locally owned company based out of Kansas City. But they were able to run the ball. It's just when you implode and melt down the way that K-State did, you have to completely abandon that. And there was no real downfield passing game. There's not much of a threat of a downfield passing game with this offense right now, period, just based on where Avery seems to be at with his development. And so that makes it a lot tougher. You have to kind of abandon the one thing that was really working for you.
Well, the concern is, if you don't stick to your script and don't get off to a good start in a game, are you going to be able to handle the adversity and come back then? So if you don't get out and get ahead of teams, if you fall behind by 10, 14 points, and yes, I know they already came back from 10 down against Tulane in the second half this year, but in the Big 12, you fall behind by 7, 10 points in the second half. Are they going to be able to bounce back and recover from that? Is the passing game going to get better? Are the receivers going to get more open? I mean, let's be honest here. The receivers dropped a ton of balls once again. I mean, I could count 3 or 4 drops. Now, the game was probably already out of hand at that point when they occurred, but multiple drops, the penalties, the running game's been great. I mean, look, this is the first time I went back before the game planning that K-State would probably run for over 200 yards in this game. K-State's now rushed for over 200 yards in 4 straight games to open the season. I can't find another season that's occurred where they opened up the season with 4 straight 200-plus yard rushing games. If you date back to the end of last season, they've now run it over 200 yards 6 straight games as they went for over 200 against Iowa State and NC State in the bowl game, and that's one of the longest streaks in K-State football since the year 2000. So they're running the ball really effectively. They're averaging almost 6 yards per carry. It's can they complement that with the passing game enough to where teams aren't just going to completely start stacking the box and taking away the running game? That's going to become ultimately the question. But look, at the end of the day, when you lose the turnover battle in the way that K-State did and you give up 2 non-offensive touchdowns, this is what's ultimately going to happen. I mean, you give up 2 non-offensive scores and you lose the turnover battle 3-0, you're not going to win football games. And Chris Kleiman and this K-State team has been one of the best teams in the country in turnover margin each of the last 2 years. 2022 and 23, they were top 10 in the country and they were best in the Big 12. They lose the battle 3-0 in this game, and I went back through it since the year 2021. K-State is 22-4 when they win the turnover battle, and they are 2-8 when they lose the turnover battle. So that's what's going to happen. And look, now this is another thing where we talked about it heading in, where K-State, they avoided the non-con dud. They get out of non-con play unscathed, 3-0, and we talked about it on the preview show. You go 3-0, can you open up Big 12 play with a win this year and keep the momentum going? Because they were 3-0 in 2019 and 2021. And they went into Big 12 play, and they lost back-to-back games each of those seasons. In fact, in 2021, they lost their first 3 Big 12 games after going 3-0. Well, now you go 3-0 in the non-con, and once again, it happens where K-State drops the opening game in Big 12 play. They're 0-1 now. K-State hasn't gotten off to a 4-0 start since the year 2012, which is really quite a shocking number to think about. Another slow start there. And the other thing, John, this is an interesting thing. I don't think it means anything necessarily, but 2019, 2021, and now 2024 in those Big 12 openers. In the years they went 3-0 in the non-con, they produced 2 total offensive touchdowns in those 3 games and didn't score a single touchdown in the first half of either of those 3 games. So just brutal losses in those Big 12 openers.
It was the first game since 2020 Iowa State that the K-State did not score a touchdown. Of course, top storyline brought to you by Alinco, locally owned since 1986. They started out in an industry where most have been bought out by national companies. They are still local, though. So if you need new windows or a bathroom remodel, they have premium window replacements and Kohler Luckstone shower systems. They can do new siding on your home. You don't need to be in KC or Manhattan. They'll go to Missouri, Northeast Kansas, the entire KC Metro. Just go to alencohome.com. That's ALENCO home.com. ALENCO home.com to check out their services, including free estimates. You can also give Sam a call at 913-961-2165. Well, one of my questions, I guess along those lines, Cole, would be like, do they need to try and change how they are using Avery Johnson in the offense? I know I've seen people kind of raise that question here. Do you sort of abandon trying to get the downfield passing game to really work and use his legs more? I mean, it seems like there has been a concerted effort, at least in the way that he runs the ball right now, for him to try, which is smart, by the way, to avoid taking a bunch of hits. It seems like he's a lot of times thinking about getting out of bounds, first and foremost, a lot of times when he's running the ball. And I mentioned that interception that he threw. I mean, there's a running lane there, but he's still just trying to force the ball down the field. And I understand, like, if you want to unlock all of his potential, they're going to have to try and figure that out somehow. But you're also now in a situation where you're in like a do-or-die game probably for your Big 12 championship hopes against Oklahoma State this weekend. I don't know. How would you manage this moving forward?
It's a great question. I mean, you got to do whatever it takes to win, and I haven't dove into the Oklahoma State numbers about what necessarily their weakness is right now. Obviously, I watched the game against Utah, and it sure looked like Utah was able to run the football against that Oklahoma State defense. And Bernard, he's a good running back, but he never put up a dynamic season the way he looked against the Cowboys on Saturday. So, I mean, it might be dictated on a game-by-game basis. To me, like, this team is struggling to find its identity on the offensive side of the football because it feels like they want to be a running team, but at the same time, they want to make Avery a passer, right? Because they know that that's the key to untapping his full potential and how dynamic he can be. And is he ready to be that guy yet to where he can drop back consistently and throw the ball 25-plus times a game? The arm talent is there. We see the flashes numerous times. Some really dynamic electric throws that he makes on the run, on the move. But you also have to, risk mistakes then when that occurs. And I will say, like, some of his deep balls, he's close. Like the one to Cephas in the first half, like, it was maybe a yard too far out in front of him. You'd rather miss long in that situation than short. Like he's getting close. And I think the game with each week is going to keep slowing down for him, and he's going to continue to see new defenses, new schemes, and new things, and he's going to continue to grow and learn from it. And so, I mean, for now, it's probably going to be dictated on a game-by-game basis as far as the scheme and what they try to do. But ultimately, I think by the end of the season, Avery Johnson's going to be a really good passing quarterback. I think he's going to be able to drop back and throw the football pretty consistently. It's just the growing pains that you go through right now with a young quarterback. And I know we're not, but it's definitely not nearly all on him. The offensive line didn't protect him at all. I mean, that was atrocious pass blocking. This is a BYU defense that ranked dead last in college football in sack rate last year. And you're giving up 3-man pressures to him in his face, 4-man pressure. The first interception, they don't get a hand on the defensive end on that screen, which I think did rush the throw. Now, I know on a screen you're trying to let the defense come upfield, but you got to get a hand on the guy. So I think that had an impact on that play. And yeah, I do think like Avery needs to take off probably and run more though when the field opens up. Like I completely agree with you on the pass that was intercepted. He needs to run that football, and he's probably got 20 plus yards going down the middle of the field. And, he forced the throw in there. And if, like you said, if it wasn't picked off by that guy, it would have been picked off by the safety. So yeah, it's a problem. I mean, I would also say and look, we wanted him to get to the boundary all offseason. We talked about it. Like any design running plays, make sure Avery's getting out to the boundary where you can get out of bounds. there was that play in the first half on K-State's second drive when they were up 3-0, where I think if Avery on that 30-yard run cuts it back toward the middle of the field, he might have a chance to score, but he gave the defender the boundary as an extra defender and was able to get shoved out of bounds for what was a 30-yard gain that maybe could have been a 70-plus yard gain just from what I saw. Now, that guy may have made a play, but...
well, and Cole, there was also in the second half. Now, this is, I don't sweat this as much, at least in terms of how it affected the game, because I think it was when the game was pretty out of reach. But there was like a fourth and short, was it fourth and short, third or short and fourth and short, where if he kind of sticks his head in and just goes more up the middle, just takes what's there, he's probably going to get the first down. It was like a 4th and 2.
Yeah.
But then he tries to cut it outside and he gets tripped up and falls down. And it was just like, that's just what we see all the time. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of willingness to want to do that. Now, if that's a business decision, I guess based on time and scoring the game, maybe I can't be too upset at that. And you're right. Not all of this is on him at all. Even back to the Cephas play, it seems like there's not been a lot of consistency in terms of those guys being on the same page. Who knows, man? Maybe I didn't watch the entire route. Maybe Cephas slowed up a touch, and that's why the ball ends up being, a yard too far there. Like there are a million reasons that things could be going wrong on the offense when you have so many new pieces, and we voiced concern certainly about the receiver room heading into the year. Like I think it could be a myriad of things going on there. So it's not all on Avery, but the question now is, obviously how do you move forward with it?
Yeah, and just I think on that 4th and 1 where he did get tackled short, honestly, I think that's a young player down by 3 scores just trying to bust a big play. Like he's thinking, if I can get to the edge there, trying to hit a big play and probably just trying to do too much. And I can't necessarily blame him for that. K-State needed chunk plays at that point if they had any hope of coming back. And unfortunately, just barely got tripped up, and that's what happened. Wide receiver play, I thought Keegan Johnson, I think Keegan Johnson's been fine this year, and it felt like it was a point of emphasis to get him the ball on the first drive of the game. And the second drive, I think he had 3 catches. He looked good. And then he got one more touch, I think maybe one more target the rest of the game as it went on. I feel like Keegan and Jace have been fine. They haven't gotten much from any of the other guys. Jaden Jackson, Dante Cephas. They talked about Sterling Lockett this offseason. He doesn't have a catch yet. Now he was wide open at Tulane, and that one was missed. But you haven't gotten much from wide receiver play, obviously, and so that's going to have to improve, because I do think teams are ultimately going to start gearing up, loading the box, and that'll get me to my next point, and I know we got to take a break, but Dylan Edwards is probably a guy you're going to need to force feed a heck of a lot more because he's one of your best players.
All right, well, friends at Home Field Apparel can make you look good, even if K-State is struggling. Go to homefieldapparel.com to get the best K-State gear around there. They've got 50-plus retro items. If you want to branch out like our guy, DY, you can do so with 100-plus other teams up there. It's what everybody is wearing right now. Homefieldapparel.com for the best K-State and college gear around. And use promo code 3MA24 to get 15% off your first order. That's promo code 3MA24 to get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. We're back in just a moment.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
All right, well, you brought up Dylan Edwards. He did get on the field a lot more. I believe I saw our guy Parker in the Discord, patreon.com/3ma, if you'd like to be a part of the Discord community. I believe he said it was 21 snaps for Dylan Edwards. Did I have that right? 21 snaps?
21 or 23. I can't remember the exact number. It was 20.
Over 20 snaps. So, they were making more of an effort, but yeah, and he's been so good, man. He impresses me running between the tackles every time. But yes, he's such a dynamic weapon. They're going to have to find a way to make him a more effective part of the offense for sure.
Parker Fleming Stats of War on Twitter had this last night, John, where Big 12 yards after contact for 2024 running backs, minimum of 20 attempts. Dylan Edwards, #1 in the Big 12 at 6.19 yards after contact. The next closest guy is Corey Kiner, Cincinnati, at 5.15. So a full yard plus more than the next closest guy in terms of yards after contact this year, which brings me to the next point. Dylan Edwards on the season, 21 carries, 179 yards, 8.5 yards per carry.
That's crazy.
Why is Dylan Edwards getting 6 carries in a game? 6 carries for 41 yards at BYU. 6 carries for 41 yards against Arizona. 4 carries for 54 yards against Tulane. This is not rocket science. Get your best players to football. And I'm not saying you got to take a bunch of touches away from DJ Giddens. He's one of K-State's best players as well. I saw people commenting about that on the show Curry and I did last week. You can't take away touches from DJ. You absolutely can have both of them on the field. You got to get Dylan Edwards more involved, more carries, more in the receiving game. I still am I'm just perplexed with what they're doing there. They have not utilized him in the passing game near enough, and I don't know what the scheme is, but the last 2 weeks, the only pass that's been thrown to him has turned out to be a curl route on the boundary that went 5 yards, and that's not the type of route I envisioned Dylan Edwards running when he came to K-State. I envisioned them getting him matched up on linebackers, crossing routes going across the field, mismatches, wheel routes down the sideline, utilizing his speed, not running 5-yard curls at his size. I don't get it. Like, yeah, they got him on the field for 20 plus snaps, but he's one of your most explosive players for an offense and a coaching staff that said they wanted to be more explosive this year. Chris Kleiman said they were hoping to be more explosive. K-State averaged 5 plays per game last year of 20 or more yards. This year, they're averaging 4 plays of 20 or more yards. So they've actually gotten worse in terms of explosiveness. Well, your most explosive guy is Dylan Edwards, and they're not getting him the football. And that's on the coaches to figure out. They have to do a better job at figuring out how to get Dylan Edwards more involved in the game, because 6 touches, 7 touches a game is not even close to what he should be getting at this point.
I mean, they are getting to the point where, he was out in the slot. They had him lined up out wide some. So clearly, they're making some sort of an effort to get in the ballpark. But yeah, I'm with you. It's not working out. It feels like an underutilized weapon right now. And maybe he may be the guy that's attracting the most attention when he's actually out there, and that frees some other things up. But you got to find a way. You got to find a way to get the football in his hands is the bottom line. I do agree with you on that. Defensively, I thought K-State, for the most part, was fine. They were obviously put in terrible positions. BYU's drives, where did I have that note yesterday? BYU's touchdown drives, it's kind of comical when you go look. They were all less than 40 yards.
Yeah, 27, 29, and 38 yards.
There you go. Yeah, 29, 27, 38 yards for the touchdown drives for BYU. And then they have a fumble 6 and a punt return touchdown. So, I don't know exactly what you want the defense to do. Now, having said that, they did seem to be really picking on Keenan Garber and Marquise Siegel. We don't know specific schemes when everything is happening. So it's it could be somebody else. The issue is somewhere else, but every time it seemed like BYU was completing a big pass, it was either Siegel or Garber that was tailing the play, or in some cases, both of them. So I don't know how much of a concern that is to you, but that is definitely one observation from what was going wrong with the defense when they were trying to protect the short field.
Yeah, look, the defense started off great. They forced punts on the first 2 drives. The third drive, BYU got a field goal. So first 3 drives, 3 points in total, and it looked like that was going to be all they got in the first half until the scoop and score, etc. Now, the one thing I will say is this defense, we've talked about being the strength of this football team coming into the year, so many veteran returning guys, and when your offense is struggling, your defense needs to make a play. And the defense did not step up, even put in tough positions. And I'm not expecting them to be perfect there, but they had nothing. They couldn't get a stop when they were put in those bad positions. They gave up the 27, the 29, the 38-yard touchdowns. You got to find a way to hold BYU to a field goal on one of those. You got to find a way to force negative plays and force them to punt or not get a score on one of those 3 drives. And, that was disappointing for a defense that we've heralded coming into the season to be so much better. When adversity hits, those guys need to step up when the offense is struggling, and they didn't. Guys were running wide open. There was poor tackling. The game was in hand at this point, but the 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 9 run in the fourth quarter that K-State missed 5 tackles, that was infuriating to watch. So just honestly not a good effort. Chris Kleiman said we didn't do anything well after things snowballed there. And he's right. The defense was awful as well in the second half of the game. Now, again, I know they weren't put in good positions, but they have to be better than that. Retzloff, he's a guy that's been a turnover machine in his career. You don't force any mistakes. Turnovers there. BYU doesn't have a single turnover in the game. And so it was disappointing. And yeah, guys wide open again. And the secondary, you thought was fixed maybe after the Arizona game, but you got a simple slant route where a guy's got no one within 5 yards of him in the end zone on that play that put him up 24-6. So
I'm glad you mentioned that. I wanted to bring that up because I saw somebody from BYU Twitter was pointing out in the video of that. So that was a touchdown pass to Darius Lassiter, and they had run. I can't remember if it was like a pick concept or something like that, but the whole concept of the play, the other receiver who was kind of like the decoy in that play, they pointed out in the video. They were like, look, the guy who's supposed to be like a decoy and like selling this thing can't help himself but to turn around and look because he knows that it's wide open. Like he knows what's coming. He saw it all. Like they had schemed the hell out of K-State on that play so well that the guy who's the decoy kind of gave his cover up because he knew it was coming and he was just excited to turn around and look at the touchdown. So yeah, that was not a great look. Not a great look.
I saw that as well. Kind of reminded me of the Tulane pick play in the sense that the guy that set the pick was watching to see when the ball was thrown at that point. Now, this was a legal play. They didn't do anything that would have indicated OPI here. That was just K-State not doing a good job passing things off and sticking with their guy. And then, the touchdown right before the half. Look, if you had him, I think, in 2nd and 9 there when it was still 10-6. And if you hold BYU to a field goal there, then you're still okay, down 13-6. But to give up a long touchdown pass where a guy's wide open in the corner of the end zone there, that was tough to stomach. So very frustrating across the board, all sides of the ball, including special teams, to give up that punt return touchdown, which is something I've never seen before. In K-State had guys tripping and knocking each other over. That can't happen. You can't allow a guy to run across the field retreating like that and then outrun you down the sideline. That's just everything that could have went wrong during that little 6-minute window. And that shows you how quickly a game can turn. So let's hope that never happens again.
Yeah, I mean, the punt return thing, I guess at least when he fumbles the ball and it rolls backwards like that, I imagine there are guys getting out of their lanes that they're in. It's just scramble mode because you're going for the ball. I can cut them some slack on that like it just turned into a total scramble mode sort of thing. And the guy got fortunate that the ball popped back up to him and then he made just a really nice play. And you had some bad luck with, K-State defenders wiping each other out and, everything that happened on that play. That's bad luck. But it's also just, when you don't take advantage early, you let them not only hang around, but then get all the momentum, get in front. It just feels like things start to roll that way, and then play like that happens, and it's a total backbreaker. I don't know. I mean, special teams, and hey, shout out to Chris Tennant. He was good. MVP of the night, Chris Tennant, for sure. I don't know, dude. I just still feel like, me always harping on the special teams. They've got a couple touchdowns. That's great. They've been underwhelming to me outside of that still. I don't know.
Well, it was a great.
They got an NFL special teams coach. Supposed to feel really good and excited about that. I don't know. I'm just not. Not.
Yeah, it was a great punt by McClanahan. Hell of a punt. You just didn't end up covering it. Couple other notes you mentioned earlier, John. That was 67th game that Chris Kleinman's coached K-State. It's the worst margin of defeat outside of that Iowa State game that he has suffered as the Kansas State head coach.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think to me that was the second worst game of the Kleinman era.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some people when he said that they were embarrassed that they hadn't been before since 2020 Iowa State. I'd agree with that. I did see some comments about the Iowa State game in the snow last year, which was very embarrassing from a defensive standpoint, but the offense was competent and you were competitive in that game. You were leading at various points. Yeah, and it was, to your point, again, the only time in the Chris Kleinman era outside of that 2020 Iowa State game that they haven't scored an offensive touchdown. So it's just one of those games where you just hope you flush it and you can bounce back against Oklahoma State this weekend. The other thing, I saw some stat floating around. I know that is a hard place to play at BYU, especially under the lights, and that atmosphere looked electric. But I did see like some BYU fans commenting in different areas that they're like 24-1 under the lights at home. So I had to go back and fact check that. I was like, really? Like, I feel like I've watched BYU lose games at night at home. And I went back to 2016 and games that kicked 8:15 p.m. and later Mountain Time, and they're 13-7 against FBS opponents at 16 at home under the lights and that time slot. So I did want to clarify that. It's not like they can't be beaten in that window. They're not.
I'm pretty sure it was a night game. Wasn't it a night game when Iowa State beat them like 45-13 last year?
It was the same exact kick slot window. The only thing I would say about that one was obviously BYU was down in the dumps at that point on the season, right? And they didn't have the energy level of the hope of this season. And then also Iowa State wasn't a ranked team coming in. And so there probably wasn't the same energy level or excitement. But look, BYU's lost games to East Carolina at home in the last few years. So you can go in there and beat them. But this BYU team's better than I expected. Again, I still think, I'm sorry, BYU fans, I still think K-State, if they don't have the turnovers and mistakes and they get touchdowns in the first two drives, I think they win the game handily. I think K-State's a better football team than BYU. But it certainly didn't show up that night. Credit to BYU for making the big plays, and be interesting to watch the rest of their season unfold at this point.
Yeah, I mean, look, you got to give them credit to a certain extent. I mean, I think they're certainly better than they were last year. I think that much is true. I think the defense, if nothing else, their defense is much better than it was last year. And I mean, they hired a former successful FCS head coach in Jay Hill to run their defense. Like, I would expect them to be getting better. They've got some really good players on that side of the ball. My question for them and like their ceiling would still be the offense. And that's the frustrating part of the game, Cole, is that their offense didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
You just handed it to their offense. Their defense played a great game. And, credit, they forced a fumble. They did pick up an interception. But, the interceptions, I get 2 interceptions. But they're so, it didn't feel like these are, like, crazy plays being made, It was K-State's offense, just ineptitude, kind of giving it to them there. So, I don't want to take all credit away from BYU. I think now you have to respect them at least and watch them as a potential contender there. I mean, they're going to go play Baylor on the road next week. I don't know. That's a tough game. Baylor's going to be super down in the dumps, but they very well could win that and be 5-0 all of a sudden. I mean, I think you have to respect them to an extent there, but I don't think they're Utah, for instance. I don't think they're in that sort of category. I would probably still put Iowa State above them. But yes, the maddening part is you didn't make their offense work. Like, if you would have showed me the box score of the game, I mean, for one, K-State outgained BYU by 120 plus yards. But two, if you would have just shown me like the blind stat lines of the quarterbacks, and you tell me that one quarterback throws 2 interceptions, no touchdowns, and the final score was 38-9, I would have said, all right, sweet. That's great. Jake Retzloff continues to turn it over. K-State probably scored on one of those. Maybe one of them's a defensive touchdown. Let's roll. K-State wins the game 38-9, but instead it was your quarterback turning it over, and you made life pretty easy for Jake Retzloff, just operating short fields over and over again and never like feeling much pressure. Like, even when you were moving the ball and scoring, you're just kicking field goals. So there was never a lot of pressure put on him to try and make plays and try and press and force. And that's, when you do that to him throughout his career, he has been as turnover prone as almost anybody that's played regularly in college football, and you just never did that.
Well, consider this, John. Here are the drives that BYU actually had to start on their own side of the 50-yard line. Here's the end result. Punt, field goal, punt. So when you didn't put BYU's offense on K-State's side of the 50-yard line, they scored 3 points in 5 drives. When they had to drive the field, they didn't. When they had a short field, they were able to make it happen. If you make that BYU offense have to go 10 to 12 plays, we talk about the key to explosive plays all the time, because the longer your drives that go, the more opportunities there are for you to shoot yourself in the foot and make a mistake or commit a penalty or a turnover, right? And that's exactly what happened to K-State. They had a 12-play and a 16-play drive to start the games, and that's great. You're dominating time of possession, controlling the clock, but they shot themselves in the foot with penalties at the end of the drive because they didn't get that explosive level play that resulted in a score. If you make this BYU team drive the length of the field, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot at some point. In all likelihood, the odds will say that. And so that's frustrating that they were given such short field opportunities and get the non-offensive TDs as well. Because ultimately, I don't think that BYU offense scores more than 14 to 17 points on K-State if K-State doesn't turn the ball over to them and makes them drive the length of the field. And then you're telling me if K-State only has to score 14 to 17 to win, I think they're going to win the game. And so that gets me back to the point earlier that if they capitalize and score touchdowns on those first two drives, they completely take the crowd out of the game. You talked about their fan base like expecting to lose, John, going into the game for being around them. You get up 14-0, they're just like, oh, K-State's so good. And then not only that, you get up 14-0 with the way you were dominating the line of scrimmage and running the football, and you get that BYU defense tired. And BYU then has to drop back and just rets off, you pin your ears back, go after him. That's why he's going to make mistakes. And so to me, that's why that was such a critical component of the game, is just not getting in the red zone or not getting touchdowns in those opportunities in the red zone. K-State was number 2 in the country last year at converting red zone opportunities to touchdowns. Well, 3 drives in the red zone in this one, and you got 3 field goals, so 0% on touchdown rate in this one.
Yep. We've pretty much talked, I think, all the way around in a circle now, back at the first point of that. And then, look, I know we're all upset, but I do have somewhat of a peace offering for you. If you'd like to win $500, you can go to BlueWirePods.com/survey and complete the Blue Wire audience survey about you and your podcast listening habits for a chance to win a $500 gift card. This survey will help create a better advertising experience for audiences and, in turn, help this show. That's BlueWirePods.com/survey, where all you have to do is answer some simple questions for a chance to win $500. Make sure to read the full terms and disclaimer, plus complete the survey for a chance to win. BlueWirePods.com/survey. The link is also in the show notes of this episode. Well, now you're going to welcome in the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Are you in the mood for Oklahoma State jokes, Cole? I mean, your Cowboys looked pretty awful on Saturday. The final score not at all indicative of how much they just got their ass completely kicked up and down by Utah with a true freshman starting quarterback in there. Cam Rising doesn't even play. I watched like 2/3 of the game, and then I had to drive from Park City to Provo, and I was listening to the satellite radio broadcast of the Oklahoma State radio network, who, like, those guys do an excellent job on the call, but like it sounded like a funeral in there. Like, just the not just like how they were calling the game and reacting to it, but just the crowd. Like, Utah completely sucked the life out of that place. Alan Bowman was awful and got benched. Like, as bad as it feels right now for K-State, like, Oklahoma State has some major problems too. They probably should have lost to Arkansas, gave up 600 yards of total offense to them, had to scramble to win that game in overtime, and they just got clubbed by Utah in their home venue on Saturday. So it's going to set up a real interesting matchup of desperation between the two sides. You know, 2 of the top 3 contenders in the league now, and somebody's going to fall to 0-2. So I don't know. We'll see how they respond. It does feel to me like this is a team, because of how young they are, that could probably give you a much, much different kind of output consistently at home than they could on the road. So that is definitely a silver lining there.
Well, I think you feel worse if you're an Oklahoma State fan because you lost at home and you had a lot of advantages in your way with Cam Rising not playing. You got a backup quarterback that's a young player coming into your stadium. You have the heat advantage, a team from Utah coming in to play where they said the field level was 140, 145 degrees according to the temperature level. And you think Oklahoma State should dominate that game as a result with those advantages, and they didn't. They just got owned at the line of scrimmage. A very disappointing game for Oklahoma State. And, you know, you got to wonder what type of toll that takes on them. Look, K-State they got back at like 5, 6 in the morning. So, like, this is not an easy recovery timeline for K-State as well, John. But that Oklahoma State defense was on the field for 81 plays in 140 degrees. And then we already had talked about the toll of playing Utah heading into the season. And, you know, they're a physical team. That's what they're known for. And, like, the physical toll it takes on your body. And then you talk about that defense being on the field for 81 plays and that heat. You know, how do they bounce back? How do they recover? Look, I know people say they're college kids, so they'll probably be fine. But, you know, you got to think that plays a little bit of a factor. And then what's the mindset of that Oklahoma State locker room and Alan Bowman after your head coach benches you after one half of bad football? Like, that was a bad coaching. Even, you know, Bowman's not I'm not a huge Bowman fan or defender, but to bench him in that situation and put Garrett Rangel in the game was just nuts to me. I mean, we know what Garrett Rangel can do. He's, let's hope. I would love if Oklahoma State started Garrett Rangel this weekend instead of Alan Bowman, but we know they're not. Mike Gundy said Bowman's the guy still moving forward. So,
well, maybe if they started him, you would call him Garrett Rangel, which would be a nice start. But he was 3 for 11 in the game, so that did not work out well.
I don't think his name pronunciation warrants being called correctly with the way I've seen from him and his career. So I don't understand that. It's a must-win game for both teams. If you start 0-2 in league play, you're not winning the league. You're not getting to the Big 12 championship. There's really just no way to get there in my mind. I think Utah is already a lock at this point unless they suffer devastating injuries because they have a really weak schedule in the Big 12, and they just took out the one game that everybody thought was a chance to lose. I don't see Utah losing more than one Big 12 game. So you can pencil them in my mind, in the Big 12 championship, and you got 15 other teams duking it out for one spot. You can't finish worse than 7-2 in the league to have any sort of a shot in my mind. So you're at home. K-State has to win this game and bounce back. But we'll see, if they can minimize mistakes and what adjustments Gundy and Oklahoma State makes. They'll be desperate too.
Yeah, I mean, really the toughest. They have Iowa State in Utah, in Salt Lake, and they have to go to UCF. Those are their last 2 games of the season. I don't know how much you believe in UCF making it there, but, they've got Arizona at home on Saturday, which, boy, they are going to just physically whip Arizona. I don't care that Arizona had a week off. They will just physically destroy them, I think, in Big 12 After Dark this Saturday. They've got a week off. They go to Arizona State. That shouldn't be a problem. I mean, whatever the hell TCU's doing, they're going to bring that to Rice-Eccles on October 19th, and they go to Houston, who looks bad. BYU, if the Holy War were in Provo, I would be more interested in it, but it's going to be at Utah. So it's that last month of the season. They go BYU at Colorado, Iowa State at UCF. Maybe there's some intrigue there, but, we'll see. Nick points out BYU rivalry game. Look, I'm not going to just hand it to Utah. I mean, teams will make them earn it, I'm sure, to an extent, but they sure look head and shoulders above everybody else, especially when they're doing it again with a true freshman quarterback. Like, their offense is not doing a whole hell of a lot, but they're just so physical. They're mauling everybody, and that defense is really, really good. So I don't know. Are you buying into, Cole, like, hey, this team, your ups and downs based on home road just because of the youth and inexperience? I mean, that was really kind of my theory coming into the year and picking them 9-3, where I thought, like, hey, you got some tough road trips here. I would imagine you're going to get some dud efforts on the road because this team is young and Avery is young, and he's the biggest leader basically that you have on the team.
Well, I mean, look, that if you would have said going into a 3-0 BYU team the way that they had played to start the year, and you had to go there and play a 9:30 kick Central Time, 8:30 that time, like, that's almost one of the worst case scenarios in hindsight that we could have drawn up for this football team to go on the road. I mean, that you guys were there. I saw numerous K-State fans saying that might be the best atmosphere in the Big 12 and the loudest atmosphere, and so for that to be like the first real road atmosphere for this team, not counting Tulane really, because it's just not even comparable, then yeah, I mean, that's almost like the worst situation you could have went into with an energized crowd, with an undefeated team, and you ranked top 15. And yet you still came out and hushed the crowd and were dominating. You were ready to play. You were controlling the first 26 minutes, 28 minutes of the game. And so I thought that was a sign of maturity that they were able to do that, and then they just could not respond to the adversity when things started going downhill, and that's concerning. That's a youth thing to me, maybe a maturity thing, and so they'll have to hopefully find a way to get bounced back at home. But yeah, I think coming back home will greatly benefit this team, and then a much-needed bye week to mentally and physically refresh, and then go to fraudulent Colorado, which had no business winning that game in Boulder. Like, I feel much better about winning the game at Colorado than I do, I can't say at BYU now because I thought K-State would win the game, but I do think K-State will win in Boulder if they beat Oklahoma State. Now, I'm a little nervous about the secondary covering the Colorado guys with what we've seen so far this year.
I don't like, how are you feeling about that?
But I watched that Baylor-Colorado game. Baylor controlled the game Colorado had no business winning. I think K-State's better than Baylor. I don't buy into Colorado still. So that's why this game is so huge. If you beat Oklahoma State, get the bye week, you refresh. And then I think winning at Colorado is a very strong possibility. And then West Virginia is just not the team that I thought coming into the season. I was very wrong on West Virginia. Credit to them for a remarkable comeback down the stretch. But like I watching that West Virginia defense and that team, I think that's a team that's going to fall off as the season goes. So that's a more winnable game to me than I initially had thought going into the season.
Yeah, look, just beat Oklahoma State and figure it out from there. I mean, that's basically it right now. Okay, well, hopefully we'll hear from DY on Wednesday. Hope that he gets back from Utah, and hopefully we're in a little better mood as we start to move forward to this weekend against Oklahoma State. So thanks to all of our sponsors. We appreciate them. Make sure you go support all of them because they support us and help make this show all possible. Thanks to Nick Springer behind the scenes. For Cole Manbeck, I'm John Kurtz. Thanks for listening to another edition of 3 Mile.